welcome to our next instalment of our IP Inclusive 10-year anniversary podcast. I'm Jodie Bates and I'm the IT trainer at Bolt. I'm joined with Max Waters.
Hi Jodie, how you doing?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. Um, Also, we have on the call with us today is Vicky Barker, who works for Finnegan Law.
Hi, Jodie.
Hi. And Marianne Privett, who works at Venner Shipley.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. And Tom Leonard, who works for Kilburn and Strode. Hi,
Hi
Tom.
everyone. Hello.
Hi, Tom. So do you want to, our podcast session today is about IP and out. So Tom, would you like to kick it off with your involvement with IP and out?
Sure. So IP Out is one of the support networking groups that falls under the umbrella of IP Inclusive. We will be celebrating our 10-year anniversary next year, so we've been going for some years. My history with it is when I started in the profession nearly 20 years ago, there were no LGBTQ plus networks that I was aware of in the IP profession. To find one, I had to go further afield to the wider legal profession to find an LGBTQ plus network. And I think part of that was because a lot of patent and trademark attorneys work in small firms. So they never really reached the critical mass that enabled them to have an LGBTQ plus network. About 10 years ago, or maybe perhaps just over 10 years ago now, I had the privilege of attending what I think was the first IP Inclusive meeting, although it wasn't called IP Inclusive then, called by Andrea Brewster, who wanted to see what we could do about increasing diversity and inclusion in the profession. And this something for her was quite personal. She has a trans daughter, and I think she recognized that the profession wasn't a particularly inclusive place. And it was at that first meeting that I put my hand up and said I would love to start an LGBTQ plus network. And so with the help of, I think about 4 other people at that time came on board, we founded IP Out and had our first session on the topic of how out can I be, a debate on how out am I allowed to be at work back in 2016. And I've been on the committee ever since.
Oh. So my first question is, what does LGBTQIA plus mean? Because over the years it has adapted to be more inclusive, and rightfully so. I don't personally know what it stands for. So I wonder if you could give some of our listeners an overview of it, if that's okay.
Sure. So LGBTQIA plus, which I think was the version that I've just been asked about, stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or sometimes questioning, intersex, asexual, or aromantic, and the plus represents essentially all other identities and orientations that don't fit neatly into one of those categories. You're absolutely right, Jodie. The acronym has evolved over time, and I think that's a reflection of how our understanding of gender and sexuality has itself become more inclusive, and there's increased recognition of and respect for essentially the diversity of the human experience. I mean, in the context of IP Out and the wider IP professions, I think it's also a symbol of visibility. So as a whole piece, it's a symbol of visibility. I think lots of us in IP are used to thinking analytically, but identity and inclusion are about people, and using inclusive language signals that everyone is welcome to be authentic at work. So I think as a piece, as an LGBTQI, all of those things together, it's a inclusivity signifier. I just wanted to mention another thing about the acronym. There's a history on the order of the letters, which I think is really interesting, and why in particular the L, representing lesbians, appears first. So during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and of course AIDS hit the gay community first and hardest, gay men didn't receive any help from the state. I mean, famously, it took Ronald Reagan, I think, 4 years to even publicly acknowledge that the AIDS crisis existed. And of course, many men did not receive support from their family members either. Many of them were already ostracized just for being gay, and the existence of the AIDS crisis just made that worse. And in times of essentially their greatest need, gay men's greatest need, it was lesbians who showed up. It was lesbians who showed up to hospitals to be nurses for men that had been abandoned by everyone else in their life. It was lesbians that took gay men into their homes to care for them on their deathbeds. And this is despite lesbians having been on the receiving end of a lot of misogyny from within the gay community, something which unfortunately does still happen today. So placing the L at the start of that acronym is just really a very, very small way of acknowledging all that lesbians did for the gay community during that dark period in our history.
That's a really nice note. I didn't know that. That's a really, an interesting angle to it.
Mm.
You talked
Thank
briefly,
God for lesbians, is what I always say.
Exactly. I think you mentioned a couple of things there, which would be really interesting to sort of come back on. One of them was the sort of how proud or how, out can I be at work, which is worth exploring, I think. But what about your own sort of personal journey? You mentioned when you qualified and you started in the profession, there was no sort of support network. How was that period for you at work? Coming into work and maybe not feeling like you could be yourself or feeling uncomfortable. What's your sort of memories of that time?
Yeah, God, it's so long ago now, it's hard to remember. And thankfully, it has changed so much. So, I'm really having to sort of think back to what I thought and how I felt then. But I do remember that it took me several years to come out at work, which to think that now, I mean, people could probably guess that I was a gay man. It's not that it's pretty obvious. But to actually say it out loud, it took me several years. And it wasn't that I wasn't an out person. And I was out, I would say, to the junior people in the firm. And I remember having a conversation, in my first few months there, and asking sort of an associate, a mid-level person. I think maybe they were still a trainee at that point, a mid-level person, what should I do about this? What do you think the firm is going to say or do? What are they going to think? And the advice I received then, this is back in 2006, was, well, maybe you should just be a bit careful because, this person or that person might, not take the news that well or might treat you differently. And to think that we're just so far removed from that now. I mean, I just that kind of advice to give to someone in the profession is just totally unfathomable. And the profession as a whole, I think, is just completely changed beyond recognition. We've really the progress has been extremely fast, I think. I mean, it was long overdue, and I think the IP profession was, when I joined, still a very traditional profession. And in lots of ways it still is, and there's lots of progress still to be made. But the experience of a LGBTQ plus person starting now, I think, would just be completely different to the experience of someone starting 20 years ago. I mean, I've never experienced, actual hostility, but there was nothing to make me feel welcome in that sense. In that part of my identity was necessarily welcome and ought to be celebrated.
Can I ask? Sorry, I was going to interject there. Because that was something, I'd say, as an ally, I didn't realise for a long time. I thought of being out as something binary. Once you've done it, you've done it, and I hadn't appreciated. Obviously, there are so many different aspects of any person's life that just because you're out in one respect doesn't mean you're out in another or another environment. So do you think that's different in this book? Because our profession can be quite traditional. Do you think people go back into the closet possibly when they enter the profession?
I mean, that may well be true. I wouldn't necessarily say I went back into the closet when I started, but one does have to come out all the time. You're constantly outing yourself. Like if I'm meeting a new client, I reference my husband, that's me outing myself. And often I'm doing it semi-consciously, deliberately to be like to signpost it. And so I just never took those opportunities to signpost it. well, I didn't for the first 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I think I would hope that no one would feel they need to go back into the closet. I think that maybe the experience is different for trans people.
Yeah.
I think that in particular, if you're a trans person who has transitioned and perhaps you move firms or you enter the profession, you know, in your true gender identity, and for very good reason, lots of those people will never want or need to disclose. So I think that's a slightly different angle to it. Whereas I think if you're a lesbian, you're gay, or you're bisexual, or you're queer, I would really, really hope that no one feels the need to stop outing themselves in a professional context if they're starting in the profession now.
You mentioned how you're constantly coming out in different forms, and you sort of make reference to your husband. You often make a point of it. Do you find still that you have to, I kind of looking a bit broader now, do you find you have to alter your behavior if you travel a lot for work and that sort of stuff? I mean, how does IP Out sort of provide advice to people or support for people who are, constantly being in different environments and going to new countries? And is that something that you sort of look into and support with?
I mean, I'm fortunate in that I've never had an issue on any, for example, foreign trips that I've been on, but nearly all of my foreign trips have been to Europe or the US. I think if you were traveling to some other countries, the calculation could be quite different. My own personal approach, and I'm in a privileged position to be able to say this, having now got 20 years of experience behind me, and I'm a senior person in my organization and in this industry, that I do have the privilege of working with people that I like and I think like me, and I can be authentic with, and I think that I have the best client relationship with those types of people. And so if I was ever in a situation where I thought I don't feel comfortable about this, or I don't feel happy disclosing that I have a husband to this person, I would just think that I don't need to be here. I don't need to be in this situation. I don't need to work with this person. This client's not that important. Luckily, I've never really, really had to do that. I've been really fortunate with the people that I have worked with.
That's an unfortunate balancing act that I suppose some people in this industry might have to face, at the end of the day. Like, it's a law firm's business is to work for clients, and regardless of their personal views or their statements that may be made by senior leaders within it. It's I guess it's a balancing act that people have to unfortunately face from time to time.
I mean, I think that in my organization, certainly, I think that if we encountered a situation where someone felt uncomfortable with working with a client because that client didn't like that they were gay, we wouldn't just we wouldn't just say to that person, okay, you don't have to work with that client. We wouldn't work with that client. That client doesn't align with the firm's values, and I would really hope that would be a situation that would, or a philosophy that's shared amongst lots of firms.
Saudi Arabia-based clients, for example, or clients based in jurisdictions where the regime is not favourable to the the LGBT community,
or indeed to lots of other communities. Women, for example, in the case of Saudi Arabia, I think that organizations can decide what their values are and how important their values are to them. So, for example, we as a firm have said that we are not going to do any work relating to weapons, and that's a moral choice that we've made. And so I think that that's a calculation that's a moral question that a firm should ask itself. But what's important? Are its people the most important, or is something else the most important?
I'd be interested to hear from you on this, but also from Marianne and Vicky if they have a view. But you mentioned how obviously we've come on such a long way from when you first qualified. Was that something that you see as like a slow kind of developing thing, or was there a point that you can remember where things sort of got a lot better very quickly, or has it been something that's just been a very continuous sort of slow development?
That's a difficult question. I mean, I can remember certain points, certain milestones. So the first ever IP Out event, for example, which we had in our offices in November 2016, and having 60 people show up and we could barely fit them in the room. And I remember just thinking, wow, this is amazing. I've gone from, not that long ago, not knowing another gay person in the profession to having this room full of people who are here to learn, to share experiences, to show support, to show solidarity. So that was a definite, significant moment. And I'm grateful that was able to happen. I don't know. It's quite. I find it quite difficult to think back and well, how fast was that? How fast was that progress? I'm just not sure. But there are those certain moments where I think, no, actually, this is a key moment in my career. This is a milestone in the progression of the inclusivity of the profession.
I think you almost have to sort of ask people who join the profession at different times to see whether they have different experiences, because partly what came out in the Women in IP event the other day was that I realized that I think my confidence in being able to voice my opinions and stand up for what I think is right has grown at the same time that inclusivity has grown. And that's, I think it's a mutual thing. I feel more confident because it's more accepted, and because it's more accepted, I feel more confident expressing those views. I don't know. It's kind of, it works both ways. It's definitely a more inclusive profession than it was. I feel it's a more relaxed and authentic profession than it was when I joined. And as far as sexuality goes, I'm certainly aware of the IP Out events. I've been to Interlaw events. It seems more open, but then the profession seems more open in lots of respects.
Do you feel that you've learned more about, like we talked about earlier on, the evolving sort of acronyms and the amount of people who need to be included in these conversations? Do you feel like you've learned more professionally and in your personal life about how that's shifted over the years as well?
I've learned a lot from IP Out, and I think my awareness of beyond. I mean, I had gay friends at university. It sounds ridiculous, but I had gay friends at university. I knew, but I think I understand the experiences of gay people so much more, almost solely through IP Out. Suggested topics of topics to learn about, books to read, and podcasts and so on. But all of that's really stemmed from the encouragement of IP Out. So thank you, Tom, and the other co-founders.
Thanks, Marianne, for coming along.
No, they're always interesting. Like they're very, very varied, but very interesting. So yeah, worth it.
And Vicky, what about you? Have you got sort of any take on your experiences at work, or how the atmosphere has shifted or the debate has shifted? I mean, even just through openness and conversations in the office and that sort of thing.
Well, I think I sort of started getting involved with diversity initiatives when I was at Kilburn and Strode, and I set up a Lean In circle inspired by Sheryl Sandberg's book, and that was for supporting women. It was about the same sort of time that IP Inclusive was being founded and the Women in IP group. But I do want to echo, I think, something Tom said that I think is quite important about your seniority in the firm, because while I would say that, yes, things are better now than they were 10 years ago, I'm different. I'm 10 years more senior. I'm now a pretty senior associate. I would not have a problem saying things, but I'm just trying to think back to when I was part of the reason I'm involved with IP Ability is because I had some very serious health problems when I was a junior trainee, and it was quite hard to talk about those because you didn't want to make yourself look bad, and I think that would still be a pressure on trainees. So I mean, I don't know how you would. It's quite hard for us to identify someone maybe in the IP Out community who is not comfortable because they probably wouldn't be coming to the events, but equally just knowing that they exist and they're there when they're ready for them is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I don't know. So I can say, Tom, I don't know if you're the same, but with IP Ability, we always say to committee members, you don't have to be on the website. If you want to contribute behind the scenes, you can do so. So I don't know whether you have the same, where there's people who don't feel comfortable being publicly labelled as involved, but nonetheless feel it's important that matters progress and they contribute.
Yeah, I think there are people who are more happy to be sort of pushed to the front than others, and I think that I think that we do have people that come to our events that maybe are not necessarily completely comfortable and out in their own organizations. And that's why, for example, it's very important that registration details are kept confidential, not just for GDPR reasons, but it could be potentially sensitive for people. But just to pick up on that seniority point, Vicky, I'm aware of that, and as a senior partner in Kilburn and Strode, I am one of a smallish number of people who are responsible for setting the culture of the firm. And so I do try and be very visible on the things that I do. Advertising them internally. This event is happening. We've organised this. Kilburn and Strode is hosting, and hopefully setting a good example, frankly, and showing that there are people in the leadership who are inclusive and progressive and all of those things.
I think that's so important. I was at the coffee morning, it's about a week ago, maybe 10 days, and I just happened to be in a breakout room with 5 people, and 3 of them had never been to an IP inclusive event before. But one of them said how important IP Out had been to them and helping them get their confidence up to come out. And it was the first at work, and it was the first event they'd actually ever attended for IP inclusive, but just knowing that it existed.
That's great. That's so nice to hear.
I was welling up because some of the comments were just so lovely that and just having so sometimes I think we can get a little bit despondent that maybe we haven't got the sign-ups that we were hoping for to run an event, but actually just the mere fact that we're doing it and we're thinking about these topics, it's almost like just like the people to see the subject line and go and feel reassured by that.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear about all that. One of the things that's obviously, I don't want to go down a negative route, but we touched on it earlier, Tom, the kind of political debate, particularly around like trans rights and trans people. How does IP Out and how can organizations support colleagues in the wake of, it feels like it's almost relentless at the moment, the kind of language in the media and amongst politicians about the trans debate, but also just wider issues as well?
Yes, unfortunately, we can't really ignore the wider public political conversation around gender and sexuality, and we shouldn't ignore it. We should be addressing it. We've seen such a huge rise in inflammatory rhetoric, in particular around trans and non-binary people, and that's obviously going to make people feel less safe and less inclined to be visible. On this point around going back in the closet or not outing yourself. And I think even for those people who are not in the communities most under attack, not only is it harrowing to see our trans and non-binary brothers, sisters, and siblings, suffer through this huge rollback of their rights, it's also unsettling to think, oh, are we next? I mean, we've seen the reversal of the right to abortion in the US with the striking down of Roe v. Wade, and there are cases going through the court system in the US now on the topic of gay marriage, because there are lots of people that want to overturn Obergefell, which was the US Supreme Court decision that enshrined the right of same-sex marriage for all citizens in the US. So, you've asked me how do we support them. I think it was just important to sort of acknowledge how bad it sort of is getting or has got, and what the potential implications are, even how much worse it could even still get, to sort of underline how important I think it is for professions like the IP profession and organizations like IP Out to exist and to tackle these topics. So on the topic of trans and non-binary inclusion, for example, IP Out has done a few things. We've written a trans and non-binary inclusion toolkit for UK firms to use to improve trans or non-binary inclusion within their organization, and that includes lots of things such as template policies, a glossary. I think lots of people are worried about saying or doing the wrong thing and not necessarily understanding all the terminology, and so we've tried to make it as accessible as possible.
That's available to all firms, is it? Sorry, just
it's on the
website. Any firm can download it, and
Yeah, it's on the IP Inclusive website. It also includes a guide for people managers. So if you manage someone who comes to you and says, I am planning to transition, how you might deal with that situation in a supportive and respectful way. So I do encourage people to go looking to go look at that toolkit if they think the policies of their organization could do with an improvement or a refresh. We've also run a number of trans-focused events. So most recently, we ran a webinar that was hosted by a barrister, Robin White. She is a trans barrister with lots of experience of employment law and human rights, and she was talking to us on how we were to deal with the UK Supreme Court decision can't remember the case, For Women Scotland v Scottish Ministers, I think is the name of the case. Marianne's nodding. Thank you, Marianne. Which is the toilet decision, which is the absolutely ridiculous, nonsensical, absolutely makes no sense in my view, and in many others' views of access to, well, it's being used as a way to restrict access to single-sex spaces, whereas actually all the decision was actually about was what does the term sex mean in the context of the Equality Act. So actually what the decision actually decided was very, very narrow, but it's being used as an excuse, as a sledgehammer.
Football, yeah.
Exactly. And so that's a webinar we ran. I think we had around 260 people attend that webinar. So really great engagement from the community, because I think the IP community does want to be inclusive. And it's one of the reasons I'm really happy that I've ended up in the IP profession. Although, yes, 20 years ago, it had a long way to go, and we still have a long way to go now. I think that the people working in IP are some of the greatest people there is. I mean, it's such an inclusive community, and I've been so lucky to be surrounded by so many progressive, inclusive people. And I think there are lots of professions in the world where something like IP Out and the work that we do wouldn't be met with such open arms. I think we should really be proud of, whilst the profession as a whole has a long way to go and cultural organizations still need to improve, and all of those things, of course, they do. The people in the profession, I think, are really amazing and have supported the work that IP Inclusive does to a phenomenal extent. I mean, IP Inclusive is essentially entirely run by volunteers of members of the profession, and so I think we should be really, really proud of that. Just thinking if there's anything else just on how firms can support, in particular, trans and non-binary people. So yes, do go look at the trans inclusion toolkit. There's lots of guidance in there. I think if organizations should make sure that they're equipping managers and colleagues with the confidence to challenge disrespectful or inaccurate language in a constructive way. So recently we've had a session at KNS on microaggressions, and so training on that topic isn't just helpful for the LGBTQ plus community, but for women, for minority ethnic communities, for all different, for anyone that might be feeling not included or is part of a diverse community. Signaling allyship, of course, is really, really important. So supporting initiatives like IP Out, marking things like Trans Awareness Week, having inclusive imagery and pronouns. So pronouns on emails, pronouns on Zoom, Zoom names. And I think right now for me, it's really important that we don't shy away from the fact that some of these topics have got more controversial. And actually, that's a reason that we should be addressing them more. We should be talking about these things more, because unfortunately, the ecosystem in which we currently find ourselves is very, very, very challenging from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And I think it is incumbent on senior people in organizations to make sure they don't use that as an excuse to stop talking about these things, and actually use it as a motivation to talk about these things more.
Marianne, Vicky, Jodie, have any of you got any sort of insights or any thoughts on what Tom was saying there about how, using it as an opportunity to actually properly address these topics and make people feel included?
I think it's important that firms make it clear to individuals that they are welcome to identify however they identify, but also, like you were saying, pronouns. I think that's key, especially I do all the onboarding, and as you noticed at the beginning of this session when we were prepping, I get so stressed out about referring to someone incorrectly, either getting their name wrong because I can't read it, or getting their pronouns wrong because I've just not been made aware. So that's one thing that I always get quite stressed out about, that I might accidentally unintentionally offend someone, but it's just making people comfortable to say, do you know what, actually hold on, my pronouns are they and them, or he or him. If I have got it wrong, and not think that I'm kind of gunning for him, essentially it's just a mistake, sorry, now I'm aware, I will continue referring to you correctly. But I've got my sister is a lesbian and she's married, and my brother's transgender. So when my daughter refers to my brother, she's 5, but when she was learning to speak, she was going she, and I was like, no, she doesn't mean anything by it. And then my brother's like, it's fine. But when my daughter was learning his name, he went by Lois at the time, and my daughter was calling him Wiss, and then it's like, oh no, his name's Miles now, and she's just taking it in her stride, which was quite nice. As long as people are aware, you don't question it, it's just making people comfortable.
I mean, how do you, if you don't mind me asking, like, how do you feel as a family with all this sort of unpleasant rhetoric that we're talking about? I mean, it must be very draining for people who, you know, who are the sort of subject of this kind of offensive kind of, you know, discourse that we see, I suppose, and any outward kind of aggression as well.
My sister, who is a lesbian, she's always worked in the healthcare sector. And she's now a 999 call handler for the ambulance service, and she's never really told me she's come up against any unwanted language or treated badly because of it. My trans brother, he's just left university and now seeking employment, and now, Tom, you've mentioned all of this, I'm actually like, okay, I will check in with him more often, make sure he's okay. If there's anything that I can get from IP Out to help him with whatever profession he decides to get into, it, obviously some of this can be used across other professions.
Of course, yeah.
But I think this is when he might come up against most of his struggles, is probably now trying to get into employment. He's only, I don't even know how old he is. I think he's like 19, 20. There's like massive age gap between me and my, I've got another one. There's like 20 years between us. There's massive age gaps between me and my siblings. So I think he's like 19, 20. So now he's going to try and get into a job. I think this is when he might struggle more. But at least I know I can get some resources to help him with whatever profession he gets into.
It sounds like the guidance could be cross-profession reference, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there obviously there is some IP specific things in there as well, but that it's definitely not, the whole thing's not specific to IP. It's definitely more general. But Jodie, one thing that may be of interest to you and perhaps your brother also is the most recent IP Out event, I think so, was a fireside chat by Tate Smith, who is a trans man. I found that it was a really interesting, illuminating discussion for me because, you know, okay, I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but I only have my own experience, and so I've always got more things to learn. And I really learned a lot about the trans male experience in that talk. And you know, he was talking quite openly about his experience having lived as a woman and as a man, and how, you know, just reflecting on that, and that is available as a recording. I'm pretty sure. So look at the IP Out or IP Inclusive website, and hopefully you'll be able to view that.
There's definitely a write-up.
I think we're sort of around about the half-hour mark, but which we were sort of, you mentioned there briefly, Tom. I always like to try and end things on a sort of, you know, positive note if we can. But you mentioned that you've come a long way. You still feel you've got a bit of a way to go. Where would you hope IP Out would be, and what do you hope for the next sort of 3 to 4 years or beyond, I suppose? What's the dream scenario?
Well, I obviously I hope, and I think it will, IP Out will continue existing, continue doing popular events, continue educating the wider profession. I hope that we are able to reach more of the community. I think, you know, a problem that we face, I know you said we should end on positive, but a problem that we face, and I think the other communities have as well, is it can be a lot of the same people at the events, and so making, you know, it would be nice to see more new faces at these events. So hopefully we can continue that outreach. I've recently helped set up another LGBTQ plus network, but this one in Boston, with colleagues there. It's called Out in IP. It's different. Out in IP, IP out, different. I do have to think about which one it is each time. So Out in IP is a network in Boston. So hopefully that is for LGBTQ plus people that work in IP based in Boston, and hopefully we can just see more and more of these organizations set up. We have more people putting their hand up saying they're going to offer their time and their expertise to help run these kinds of organizations, because I just think they're going to be more important than ever.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll obviously all continue to support in whatever way we can. And thanks very much to everyone for joining the conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. My first podcast.